In 1900, monk Wang Yuanlu uncovered the sealed entrance to a secret cavern. After breaking through the hidden door, the monk was shocked to find himself in a vast chamber filled with tens of thousands of manuscripts. I'm not exaggerating either, trust me. There really were tens of thousands of documents and books. The door to the cave had been sealed since the 11th century. It was discovered in northwest China over a century ago, stashed inside a place known as the Caves of 1,000 Buddhas. This was a huge find in China, equivalent to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Israel or the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt. This ancient Chinese text from 868 AD is the oldest known book that came from a printing machine. The Diamond Sutra isn't a book in the modern sense, but 7 strips of paper that were printed using carved wooden blocks. Then they were pasted together to form a scroll. There aren't any pages. The scroll unravels to be nearly 17 feet long. You might be wondering about the contents, so here it goes. The text printed in the book makes it one of the most sacred Buddhist works ever. The book, printed in traditional Chinese, is a discussion between the Buddha and one of his pupils. It's a philosophical text with the Buddha talking about the nature of reality. The reason it's called the Diamond Sutra is simple. The esoteric knowledge of what the Buddha is saying is supposed to be powerful enough to cut through the illusion of reality most people live in. Legendary Greek philosopher Plato had a secret code in his writings. Jay studied Plato's writing intensively, scrutinizing every word like he was cramming for the most important test of his life. During his scrutinizing, Jay perceived a rhythmic system in Plato's writing that reminded him of a musical pattern. This was most notable in Plato's The Republic. Jay was able to recreate a blueprint of ancient Greek musical notes based on Plato's writing. Jay found groups of words bunched together in such a way that portrayed musical scale. In simpler terms, Plato structured his book to mimic music. It adds an entirely new layer of sophistication to Plato's work that had never been identified before. It also connects Plato to Greek mathematician Pythagoras. Both Plato and Pythagoras believed the universe could be boiled down to a mathematical foundation. They also believed the solar system moved in sync with a rhythm known as a harmony of the spheres. To ancient Greek thinkers, math and musical notation worked in harmony. By Plato arranging his literary work as textual sheet music, he was writing in such a way to mimic mathematics themselves. The oldest book currently at the University of Florida libraries also happens to be one of the first books acquired by the university about a century ago. The book is a version of the New Testament bound in leather, written in Latin sometime around 1250 AD. The book was written prior to Marco Polo's travels, before the city of Istanbul existed, and at the height of the Inca Empire. On its journey through medieval Europe, many people left notes in the margins of the book. Some notes are written in brown ink, others in red. The style seems to suggest the writing came from the 14th century, but it's not totally clear. It seems as though each owner of the book wrote something cryptic in it. Scientists have no idea what the writing says. The scribbles in the margins are part of an indecipherable code. Some of the scribbles look like words, yet no words that scholars know of. Other scribbles appear to be a baffling code of letters being repeated over and over. Then, near the end of the book, there's what appears to be a cipher. There's a list of letters next to numbers, and it looks like a solution to a secret code. But it isn't. At least, scientists can't make sense of it. Maybe you can take a look at some of these scribbles and let me know in the comments if you have an epiphany that might help solve Florida's most mysterious text. Most of the codes I've told you about today have been written on paper, but this next one was written on the steel blade of a crusader's sword. It's a cryptic code engraved on cold metal from the 13th century. The code is over 800 years old and remains unsolved. The sword was forged by a blacksmith sometime between 1250 and 1330. It's been a difficult road trying to understand who wielded the weapon. After it was discovered at the bottom of a river in northern England, legend, researchers thought it was a Viking sword. However, more recent interpretations have pointed to the sword being wielded by a crusader knight from Europe in the Middle Ages. The mysterious sword was recently put on display at the British Library. A spokesperson from the museum said the pommel and hilt were made to form a cross on purpose as a piece of Christian symbolism. Knights use their swords not only for fighting, but also as a mobile altar. With the blade pointing down, the sword was one huge cross. Crusaders would sometimes etch small crosses onto the handles or onto the blades. This was typically done prior to battle to try and gain a little extra favor from God. When the fighting was over, surviving knights would fall upon their knees and pray for redemption for the murder they had just unleashed on their enemies. This sword has something else on it as well, making it very unique. A cryptic inscription runs down the length of the blade, which also happens to be inlaid with tiny gold wires. Nobody knows what language the inscription is in. Scholars think it could be abbreviated Latin or Greek, but not even the British Library has been able to figure it out. During the restoration of Yemen's Great Mosque of Sana'a in 1972, a large hoard of ancient Islamic materials was discovered. Within the collection was a manuscript that has caused more controversy in the Islamic world than any other ancient document. It's known as the Sana'a Quran, a manuscript that was written on a piece of parchment which already had writing on it. This was common to do in the Middle Ages because paper or vellum was scarce. The Sana'a Quran has two different layers of text. The upper text contains chapters from the Quran that match perfectly with the order and size of the chapters of the standard Quran. This is important because the Quran is standardized. Every single Quran is identical because in the Islamic faith, the Quran is the word of Allah. All Qurans must be exactly the same because they are the word of God, and God's word cannot be altered in any way. The controversial thing about this manuscript is that underneath the upper text, identified only by scientists scrutinizing the document with ultraviolet light, is a different version of the Quran. It's still the Quran, only its wording is different. This shocking discovery was not great news for Islamic scholars. The document appears to prove that the text was altered by a person prior to its publication. The lower text was written around 578 AD, which would make it one of the earliest versions of the Holy Book of Islam. It was written within the first few years that Islam existed. That would make the text one of the earliest versions of the Quran. If this is true, it means the upper text was somebody's edited version of the original. And since the upper version matches with the modern Quran, it would mean the standard version of the Quran is not the earliest version. Basically, the Sana'a Quran completely shatters the idea that the Quran has been the exact same forever. Clearly, someone changed something, meaning the book was written by human hands and altered. It's been debated by scholars for centuries. Fact or fiction? Did Jesus live, or was he a character in a book? You be the judge. Putting aside everything written in the Bible, there are 0 historical accounts of Jesus Christ existing in reality. Christians will say, who cares? He's in the Bible, so of course he was real. But historians need a little more evidence than that. References outside of the Bible are critical to determine if Jesus existed in the flesh. The Testimonium Flavianum is one such reference, found in the work of historian Flavius Josephus. It's not a large passage, nor is it even a book. It's a small section of only a few words inside Flavius's book, Antiquities of the Jews. The book was written in the 1st century AD, only a few years after Christ's death on the cross. Flavius is a fairly reliable historian. He was a scholar who put together a comprehensive history of the Jewish people. The history starts in his book with the creation of the world at the hands of God and ends with the Jewish War of the 1st century. In Book 18, Chapter 3, Paragraph 3, there is a brief description of a man named Jesus. By brief, I mean less than 200 words. The small summary includes his life and death, along with notes on the rise of the Jesus cult. In Book 20, there is also a brief mention of Jesus' brother James. And then there is a small section on John the Baptist and his unfortunate beheading. The Jewish historian corroborates a lot of stuff that's found in the Bible in less than 200 words. Plus, many of his other writings are true. For example, his description of the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD and the Roman sacking of Jerusalem. Flavius was a meticulous historian who reported accurately on the events of his time. It seems like more and more bits and pieces outside of the Bible are helping to confirm events and people that actually existed. In 2012, archaeologists opened an Egyptian tomb in Deir el-Bersha. Inside one of the sarcophagi was a book that continues to baffle scientists. It's called the Book of the Two Ways. Various editions of the book had been found prior to 2012. This version is the oldest. It contains a detailed map by which the dead were supposedly able to navigate the underworld. When the dead passed to the other side, the Book of Two Ways would be waiting for them, though only if they were buried with it. Otherwise, they were up the Nile without a paddle. The book tells of two paths through the underworld, around dangerous supernatural beings, and the realm of Osiris. Although the book doesn't have any solution to avoiding Osiris, the dead had no choice but to be judged by the Egyptian god of the underworld before being let into the eternal paradise. Sometimes people confuse Osiris with Anubis. Osiris is the lord of the dead and acts as pharaoh in the afterlife and rules over the dead souls. Anubis is the god of embalming and prepares the bodies for burial and weighs their hearts so they can reach Osiris. The map is split into two paths, hence the name of the book. Neither of the paths are very easy. The deceased must fight through treacherous terrain such as lakes of eternal fire, sort of like the Christian version of hell. The Egyptian underworld even had 7 gates the dead had to pass through, like Dante on his trip through the 9 layers of hell. Each gate in the Egyptian underworld was guarded by a demon. For example, a door of fire was protected by a guardian who would not allow anyone ignorant to pass.